Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat and I am your host, and welcome back to another week on the podcast. If you are watching on YouTube or if you are a regular listening, you may notice that my environment or my sound, my visual, my audio, it's a little bit different this week. I am on an unexpected trip that I took last minute to visit some family, and we are just rolling with the episodes this week no matter what, because they got to come out and I'm excited about them. Didn't want to reschedule them. So here we are. Thank you for being here. I am so excited to introduce you to my guest and my friend this week, Katherine Rohland, who is an acupuncturist and a classic Chinese medicine practitioner. She's going to go into the difference between that and traditional Chinese medicine practitioners. We talk about women's health and fertility big time on this episode. And of course, with everything that we talk about on the episodes in general on this podcast channel, everything has an intergenerational component to it. Now, something like Chinese medicine can help heal intergenerational trauma, and she's going to tell you exactly how on this week's episode. We also talk about autoimmune disease and chronic illness and the main areas of the body that these kinds of diseases get stuck in the body, and how not only classic Chinese medicine can help support the healing and the ease of that discomfort, but also other holistic, non-traditional or classic Chinese medicine practices that you can do to help heal the body from trauma. We also talk about how classic Chinese medicine works. When you put the needle in the body, what is it activating? What is it doing in the body? How is it rippling out mind, body, and spirit? These are all the things that we geek out about on this week's episode. So I highly recommend giving the whole episode a listen, because even down to the last few minutes of the episode, we're having some deep conversations about what it is to be a woman in this world, healing our bodies, and how Chinese medicine can support you with that. If you've always been curious about it, if you're somebody who's passionate about it, or if you know somebody who's curious and passionate, share it with them, send it to them. And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review the podcast. I am still, even though I'm on my Instagram hiatus, I am still giving away a free ancestral intuitive reading to anyone who rates, subscribes, and reviews, screenshots your review, and sends it to me on Instagram at @cat_Dow. I am having my team check my Instagram messages and adding people to the list. And on the last day of every month, I announce the winner of the giveaway on my Instagram stories. And then I'm off Instagram again. I'm enjoying this hiatus. It's been really, really nice. I've been really in tune with my own energy, and I haven't been super dysregulated or distracted from social media. I got other things going on, but social media is one less thing I'm worrying about these days. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my friend, Katherine, as she talks about what she is passionate in doing to help women heal, and enjoy the episode. And I will see you guys next week. Katherine, welcome to the Heal with Kat podcast. I am so excited to have you on this week to talk all about women's health, intergenerational trauma, and the tie to Chinese medicine. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you, Kat. I always love speaking with you.
Oh, I feel the same way. We had a great podcast episode on
Yes.
your podcast, There She Goes, which I love the name so much.
Thank you.
If you guys haven't listened to that episode, Katherine had me on her podcast to talk about intergenerational trauma, one of my favorite podcast interviews and conversations I've had to date. We'll link it in the show notes below so someone can watch it and go get a taste for your community and what you're sharing on your podcast as well. Yeah, of course. And it was natural that we just had this conversation together to have you on to talk about the impact of Chinese medicine when it comes to healing the female body, healing the body in general, but also bringing in that tie to intergenerational and ancestral trauma. And I have always loved Chinese medicine. I have always taken to it. I feel like when I get acupuncture, I have like energy. I can feel like energy in my body, and I can feel things like shifting and changing. So I'm really excited to share your knowledge with everyone.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's dive into you and your story, because I know it's a big and a profound story that brought you into what you do today. So give the community a little sense of who you are.
Yeah, to give you a little background and hopefully not make it too long, I started out working in marketing. So I had no background in Eastern medicine or holistic healing at all. I grew up with Western medicine. We saw doctors, we took medicine, the picture. And I went into marketing after school. It's never what I wanted to do or I love to do. I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and I wanted to make money, and marketing seemed easy, so I did it, right? And then fast forward to my mid to late 20s, I started to question, like, this isn't what I want to do forever, right? I was working for a paycheck. I was working to get to retirement. I wasn't working because I enjoyed it. And that's never fun. So I started exploring and just opening myself up to, like, what is it that I'm meant to do? And I've always had an interest and a love for health and wellness and the movement and the physical body. I was also a dancer growing up. So I knew I wanted to do something in that sphere. I just didn't know what. So what I started doing is I started working as a personal trainer, because why not? I felt like, it was something I could do on the side. It kind of driven me to that because I saw people in teaching group classes, and I was just like, it made me cringe, some of the things I'd see or I wouldn't see corrected in people. And I was like, I can do this better, so I'm going to do this. So I started teaching TRX classes when I was really popular back in the day, and I started doing personal training. And I loved it, but I was like, this just still, like, it's not enough for me. It's great. I'm helping people, but not in the way or the capacity that I want to. And I just kept researching things. At the same time, I was a runner. I had picked up running in my mid 20s, kind of as a way to beat seasonal depression during the winter, give myself an activity, a hobby, and a goal. And I was training for a marathon, for the New York City Marathon, and I had hurt my knee on a 20-mile run. It was an IT band injury, so not physically my knee, if anyone's familiar with the human body, but the IT band attaches to your hip and your knee. So when it's affected, a lot of times it can give severe knee pain. So I was left in severe pain. I went to top orthopedist. I live in New York City, so we have access to a lot of good healthcare, right? But nothing was helping. I went to massage therapist, PT, OT. I got a cortisone shot that worked for a little bit, and then it came back, right? So I was left with nothing. And then finally someone recommended to me, why don't you just go try acupuncture? And I had tried acupuncture once before a few years ago, and it was a terrifying experience where, like, I was in a dark room with a strange man. He put needles in me and basically just left, and I had no idea what was going on. But at this point, I was like, I've spent so much money, like, let's just try something else. So I went back to acupuncture based on a recommendation from someone. And after 3 sessions, I could run again, right? And this was coming from to the point where I was at pain, where just walking down the subway steps to get to the appointment was extremely painful. It wasn't just running that was painful, it was walking that was painful. So I was hooked from there, right? I was like, you know what? I've had these certain issues my whole life. I've dealt with this insomnia since I was as young as I can remember. I've dealt with shoulder pain for a lot of my life because I was a swimmer growing up, or that's what I attributed it to at the time. And I just kept going back for more things and getting more interested in Chinese medicine. And then pretty early on, it clicked for me, like, yeah, this is what I wanted to do, because I love the physical aspect of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, right? Like working with the physical body, but then also working with that spiritual body. And then Chinese medicine isn't just acupuncture and putting needles into people or using the energy channels. It's nutrition, which I've always been really big on. But Western medicine nutrition just didn't click for me, which is why I decided not to go back to school for that. It includes lifestyle habits, diet. It includes like your whole life, right? So that's how I got into acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And then how I got into working mainly with fertility and women's health, which includes trauma, which I'll kind of explain a little bit. We'll explain on the whole episode. When I was in my second year of grad school, it's a 3-year grad program for acupuncture and Chinese medicine, a master's program. I decided to go off birth control and to start trying to have a family with my husband, and I didn't get my period. So I had been on birth control for about 11 years. I went off of it expecting to get my period, and I didn't get my period. And I tried everything. I was going to acupuncture, I was doing all the things. I changed my diet and my lifestyle. And it was just a really big journey for me. And it was a struggle. There were times where I didn't have hope, times when I did have hope. But at the end of the day, that's what drove me to really get into women's health, realizing how little or how poor the information is out there. Learning, I was told from Western medicine when I was trying to get pregnant that there was nothing that they could do. My estrogen was slightly low, but because my mother had breast cancer, they didn't want to put me on estrogen, so the best they could do was give me birth control. Now that whole estrogen myth has basically since been busted, but at the time I didn't understand that. So the best they could do is put me on birth control or try IVF, which probably wouldn't even work because my body didn't have enough hormones in it, right? So I was discouraged by Western medicine in that sense and knew that there was a better way for women and women's health.
You really touched on a topic of this, I think, awakening that's happening in the US right now, that we're all many of us are waking up to the idea that our bodies have become robotic in the eyes of Western medicine, and that there's so much opportunity for us to have a more personalized care when it comes to our bodies, to even to things like fertility. I know that, my community is filled with women who are either be wanting to become mothers, or are healing their relationships to their mothers, or are mothers and are doing healing work. And that journey of motherhood, I haven't walked that path yet, but it is, from what I see on social media, a very sensitive and vulnerable journey to go on, because everyone is so nuanced. So how does Chinese medicine address that very personalized part of fertility for women? And I would even love if you could touch on the chronic illness part of it as well.
Yeah, so it's all related. Chronic illness and fertility will all go together. So the Western medicine paradigm of diagnosing and then treating with a pill just doesn't work, and especially when it comes for fertility. Because the best they can do is diagnose something wrong with your hormones, right? And give you hormones to quote unquote balance that out. But what's not balancing out? And when it comes to pregnancy and your fertility, your body still needs to be able to support the pregnancy naturally. There's no amount of medication given that can force you to support a pregnancy on your own, right? And if there's nothing wrong with you from a hormonal perspective in Western medicine, then they don't even know what to do about it, right? Like a lot of times I see patients, they have nothing wrong with their hormones. Their reproductive health looks like a perfect picture, which can often be the most discouraging thing for a woman to hear, but honestly shouldn't be, because it's a gift that means you only have to do a little bit of work and not a ton of work, right? But this idea that our body is just our reproductive health is a Western medicine thing, where in Chinese medicine, we're looking at your entire body. We're looking at all of your systems, your endocrine system, your nervous system, every system, your automatic nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system, your parasympathetic nervous system, every system and aspect of your body, every organ, they're all connected and play a part in your fertility and your ability to reproduce. So what Chinese medicine does different is we're looking at the person as a whole, right? Like I had a patient the other day who's struggling with infertility, has nothing wrong with her reproductive health, but has dealt with chronic digestive issues most of her life, right? Now that plays a big part in your fertility, because if your body is not able to digest and assimilate the food and the nutrients from the food that you eat, your body's not able to create the resources it needs to carry a pregnancy. And when we're talking about fertility and women's health in general and chronic health, it's all about having resources in your body. From a Chinese medicine perspective, we call these resources things like blood, qi, thin fluids, which is hydration, which is really, it's talked about in Western medicine. It's not as highlighted, though hydration is so important because you need that fluid, that water, to create resources like blood. Blood is a byproduct of water. Yin, yang, and qi, right? Those are what we call resources in Chinese medicine. You can call those resources hormones if that makes you feel better, but it's your body needs something to create something to for your body and your organs to function and work properly.
So how does that happen in terms of trauma? Like, I've had so many guests on the podcast talk about the biological components of trauma from many different angles. And we know from studies and books like The Body Keeps Score that our physical bodies are holding on to the emotional energy or the physical energy of trauma. How does Chinese medicine aim to relieve people from the ways that they're storing trauma in the body? And I asked that question. I just want to clarify for the audience, because I would assume that fertility issues and chronic inflammation and chronic disease are a result of unhealed and unacknowledged trauma living in the body.
Absolutely.
Correct? Okay.
Yeah. So to wind it back just a little bit, just to define trauma first, so we're all on the same page. From a Chinese medicine perspective, keeping in mind the energy of the channels and how they work, I define trauma as anything in the past that keeps you stuck in the past, right? Me and you can have the same event happen to us, and one of us might think it's traumatic and one of us might not, right? It's your reaction to that event. It's not necessarily the event, although we could say there are certain events that are going to be traumatic to everyone, such as physical or sexual abuse. So trauma is anything that keeps you stuck in the past, right? It's any time in the past where emotions were too big for you to handle, or you weren't getting enough in return, meaning you weren't getting that love and support that you needed. Trauma is also anything from the past that keeps you moving forward in the future, right? It's those events that create fear, anxiety, and worry for moving ahead in the future. So that keeping in mind, from a Chinese medicine perspective, we have energy channels in our body that record our history. So they're called the 8 extraordinary channels. And the 8 extraordinary channels, they develop through us with age, right? We're born with the channels, but they start to blossom, for lack of better words, as we age and grow. And these channels, the first few years of life, are really important for us because that's when our core values, our DNA, or genetics, or epigenetics are really imprinted into us. And then they'll continue to unfold as we get older because these channels hold the blueprint of our life. They hold our past experiences. They hold our current experiences. They hold our blueprint of where we're meant to go in life. So when someone has a traumatic event, let me give an example so this makes a little bit more sense. So let's say someone has physical abuse when they were younger, right? That's a traumatic event that I think we can all agree is traumatic to most people, to almost everyone. What that does is it creates an imbalance in an energetic channel in Chinese medicine that we call Qigong. It's also called the Sea of Blood. Now, the function of Qigong, it has a lot of functions, but the main function is to provide energy, yang energy, from our kidneys, where our kidneys store all our yin and yang energy. So it supplies that energy, that resource, to our spleen to control our digestion. In Chinese medicine, spleen is the organ that controls digestion. So if that organ is thrown out of, if that channel, that Qigong channel is thrown out of balance, our spleen is not able to get the energy it needs from our kidneys in order to digest the food we eat. And then it's not able to use the food that we eat to create blood in our body. When we're not able to create blood in our body, it throws our reproductive health out of balance because our reproductive health is really guided by the flow of blood and having an abundance of blood in the body.
It makes sense because, you hear things like the liver carries anger. If you have liver issues, and then, when my brother-in-law passed away, I got acupuncture from someone and they measured my pulse and she said, I can tell that you're carrying grief in your lungs from his passing. So, when you look at the physical body, and what I'm hearing you say is that certain organs carry the energy of certain emotions. And when there's no flow in those places, then we experience physical dis-ease. And I know that for myself, 2024, it's no secret to the community. I was really going through a ton of health issues. There's so many components to it, but it was almost like every time I'd go to acupuncture, there would just be the same issues happening over and over and over again. And I kind of got to this place where I was wondering if acupuncture was enough. Was there more to do? Is it the end all be all? I'd feel good while I was on the table, but when I'd get up and leave, the issues would just come back again. What would you say to somebody who is experiencing long-term chronic illness issues? And what does acupuncture aim to do for somebody like me who feels great on the table? And then, once they get back into daily life and they're doing all the things, and I'm putting it in quotes, it just goes back. Like, what are we working towards? Hey everyone, it's Kat popping in during the episode today to tell you about my free cycle breaker quiz. Do you ever feel like you're the black sheep of your family, or maybe you find yourself stuck in the same family patterns or dynamics over and over again with no relief? Well, what if I told you could transform that role into something really, really powerful? When you take my cycle breaker quiz, I help you understand the childhood coping tools that are showing up in your adult life today. And by understanding how you show up with your family and the role you play, this can be the portal into understanding the patterns of your lineage. Ready to embrace your role? Go to katdow.com/cyclebreaker to take the quiz, or visit the link in the show notes below. Your transformation from black sheep to cycle breaker starts right now.
Yeah, so there's two sides to this, and I don't know your acupuncturist. I don't know who you're going to and seeing, and they could be a lovely person, but the majority of acupuncturists in the United States practice TCM acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine. And that's mainly because the board exams that you have to pass to be licensed in the US are based off of TCM. So all of the schools study TCM and teach TCM, right? And we all know the terms TCM and we think it's like this ancient practice, but it's actually not. Traditional Chinese medicine was created in the 1950s. It was created so when Mao came into power in China and the Communist Party, he decided to wipe out Chinese medicine. It was actually banned to practice Chinese medicine in China in the 1950s. What happened then is that he discovered, so the reason for this, because he's wanting to westernize China. So he discovered then, a few years later, the hospitals were getting overrun with ill people and the hospitals couldn't handle it. So he's like, we're going to bring back acupuncture and Chinese medicine, but in a controlled manner. So what they did is they created this organization, this school, to basically simplified acupuncture and Chinese medicine so it could be taught to the masses. And in doing so, it took away some what we call the complement channels in Chinese medicine, but the complement channels are those that are really able to treat trauma and chronic illness in the body. So when you go to a TCM practitioner and you're talking about the energy of the organs, right? The energy of your lungs, your liver, your spleen, your kidney, they're working solely on your primary channels. That's just one layer of energy in your body. Unfortunately, things like trauma and chronic illness sit deeper in the body. And in order to access that, you need channels such as the 8 extraordinary channels and the divergent channels, which were completely wiped out of TCM acupuncture. So for a long time, not a long time, but for a few years, I practiced TCM acupuncture. And I was at the point where I didn't want to practice acupuncture anymore because it just wasn't enough. Again, I got into acupuncture because I wanted to help people with everything. And when I went to school, I was told, you can't treat autoimmune disease, you can't treat cancer, you can't treat all these things. And it just didn't make sense to me. Why is this ancient, powerful medicine and wisdom? Can we not treat these big, heavy things? So anyways, I started learning more and I discovered this teacher, Anne Cecil Sturman, who is now one of my mentors, but she is one of the leaders in classical Chinese medicine, which is the medicine that was practiced 3,000 years ago. And it's really a lineage teaching. So her teacher, Jeffrey Yuan, is the main teacher in the US also. He's an 88th lineage Taoist priest. So it's really a lineage practice. But all that to say is that acupuncture really can help with this trauma and these chronic illnesses. It just needs to be the right type of acupuncture. That being said, it can take a long time to overcome chronic patterns. And chronic illness is born out of chronic patterns, right? In Chinese medicine, we have a channel, Yin Xiao Mai, that relates to that energy of not feeling good about yourself. That's one of those 8 extraordinary channels. The 8 extraordinary channels sits at our constitutional level. So they affect our DNA, our genes, our genetics. It's really that deep-rooted qi, that deep-rooted energy. And so you can treat that channel. Ideally, you should treat it for 100 days every other week for a month, and then there's a pattern. But ideally, if you treat it for 100 days, you would rebalance your yin xiao mai, right? That doesn't mean life's not going to happen. It doesn't mean you're never going to be put down and feel bad about yourself, right? I feel like you're never going to be fully healed, but in a beautiful way. You will overcome things. Have had that feeling of not feeling worthy and not feeling good enough and not being able to speak my truth. And I've overcome it, but there's still times where I question myself. And I think that's okay in a sense.
Well, it's so interesting. I have a follow-up question, but a comment before I follow up with a question I'd like to get more detail on from you. But, it's interesting because in my journey with acupuncture in the last year, there have been moments where I've been told that I'm very sensitive or that I pathologize my symptoms. And it's really disheartening because I feel the way that I feel. I feel exhausted all the time. And I put on this face and this front, but it's that battle of you don't want to let it drag you down, right? You don't want to let it kill you, but you also know that you feel a certain way and it sucks. And I've always heard that I'm sensitive. I'm emotionally, I'm sensitive. Physically, I'm sensitive. I feel everything. I believe it's a part of my soul's experience, but I also believe it's a part of the trauma that I've been through in my life as well. And it just stung. It really stung to hear those things. And their best of intentions were said, but man, did I walk away from the session going, God, is this the right fit for me? Should I keep going back? So then how would someone like me who's struggling with chronic illness and being quite sensitive and just all the things that you mentioned when it comes to traditional Chinese medicine, how would I know, or how would somebody listening know that they need to go a little bit deeper, that they need to find something a little bit different? and how to look for someone like you who does this more in-depth Chinese medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, if something doesn't sit right with you, it's okay to question, look for something else, no matter what type of medicine they practice, right? It's important to listen to what feels good to you. And I try to be really careful not to make those comments, right? It's part of also what I was taught, but also how I want to practice is the way, speak to someone the way you would like to be speak to, treat someone the way you want to be treated. So if you are dealing with chronic illness, that is a sign that you need a deeper form of acupuncture. TCM just isn't going to move the needle. TCM is not going to ever cure autoimmune disease. It's not going to cure cancer. It's not going to cure chronic women's health diseases. It can move the needle, right? Like it can help you get pregnant if you have PCOS. It will just take a really long time, but it's also not going to cure your PCOS, right? It can help you achieve your goal while you have it, which I do see a lot of people saying like, oh, how I got pregnant with PCOS or how I got pregnant with endometriosis. It's like, yeah, but you still have that, right? Which is why I practice this medicine, is because I'm an idealist. Like I never want someone to just settle for like feeling okay. That doesn't work for me. So if you want to find someone who practices what I call a deeper form of medicine, but it's classical Chinese medicine, classical acupuncture, you can always reach out to me. I work remotely and in person in New York City. You can also reach out to me for resources. I'm also happy to help with that. If you go to Anne Cecil Sturman's website, and I can give it to you if that's easier.
Yeah.
She has a directory of people who've done her mentorship and worked with her. That being said, it's like you still need to suss it out because people can study something and not practice it. So I just think, I don't know, I think word of mouth is probably the best way to find someone.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, for the little things like sleep, for instance, traditional Chinese medicine, like when I go to my acupuncturist, I feel great. I sleep, I'm good. Like the sleep stuff is great. I have to say that. Or like she'll do cupping or she'll do the moxie. And like it really does. I do feel a lot of benefit with that. But then there's other things that are just chronically happening that, it does warrant a question of like, I wonder if maybe I should go in a different direction. And because I love Chinese medicine, I love that you offer this other perspective. Now, I want to kind of circle back on some of the trauma stuff for just a second. For those who may not realize that they're carrying trauma, emotionally, and I'm going to say and physically, and I'm going to go as far as to say even energetically, because I believe it's a triangle of all three. What are some of the physical and emotional signs that they should watch for? And how would they know that Chinese medicine can support that?
Yeah, so physical signs would be any chronic illness, right? Anything that's not leaving your body, there's a reason for it. Like it's deeply rooted in you, most likely related to trauma. And because in some sense we all have trauma. I have yet to meet a person who doesn't have any trauma. And I think if you met a person who didn't have any trauma, that like would not help them and support them either, right? We all need trauma.
Yeah, it's the balance of the human.
But physically, another really great way to tell is if you have any joint pain. So we hold our emotions and we hold our trauma in our joints, in our cavities. So if you think of joints, they're these like big cavities when they have space to hold things in, right? And we can hold things in our joints for a lifetime. We can hold our trauma in our joints our entire life, and you will be safe and protected. The problem happens when we don't have enough resources, and those resources, again, being things like blood, qi, yin, yang, thick and thin fluids, to hold our trauma, to hold our emotions in our joints. Now, when we lose those resources, that's when we start to get joint pain. And that's when, that's also when you know that you have trauma. Another joint, quote unquote, or cavity, though, is our uterus and our pelvis. That is the biggest cavity to hold trauma. If you think how big and how much space you have in your pelvis and your uterus. So I would almost relate all chronic women's health conditions to some level of trauma in the body.
I'm writing notes if you don't see me looking at you, and it's just because I'm writing this down because I can't tell you the joint pain when I do a blood test. I have markers for RA come up.
Yeah.
And I have endometriosis, and I've got and if I eat something outside of my norm that's like inflammatory, the first thing is I get wrist and elbow pain or sometimes shoulder pain. My sister-in-law does foot zoning, which is like deeper than just reflexology. And she was doing a foot zoning on me, and she said, do you have joint pain? And I said, yeah, I do. And she was working on the right side. She goes, have you ever had something like strep or like a virus or bacteria in your body? And I was like, I'm fighting SIBO, but also it comes from a strep overgrowth, which is connected to my endometriosis. She said, well, it's stored in your joints. And she could
Yes.
tell that, yeah, she could tell just by the foot zoning. So I would love to learn personally more about that. Like, what can we do outside of classic Chinese
Yeah.
medicine that can support this stuff?
Yeah. So just to add to that, we don't just hold trauma in our joints, we hold pathology. And in Chinese medicine, we should define this. We hold pathology is trauma. So long held emotions and trauma is what we call pathology. A virus that we come into contact to that our body is not strong enough to repel is pathology. Ingesting a lot of toxins over a long period of time is also pathology, right? Like taking birth control for 10 years is going to end up as pathology in your body, right? So those are all things that are held in your joints, not just solely trauma. But what you can do to support this is build resources in your body. Chinese medicine is all about building resources. If you have enough resources in your body can heal itself. Your body is meant to heal itself. Your body is not meant to live in disease and discomfort. But the problem is, in modern society, we don't nourish our resources. We don't nourish our yin, our rest, right? So in order to build resources, it's really important to, one, focus on a diet of cooked whole foods. I say this all the time and it sounds so silly, but it's so important that the foods be cooked because cold foods are harder for your body to digest. Foods that are harder for your body to digest are harder to assimilate and create resources out of, right? Like I mentioned already. On top of that, cold foods tax our spleen, the energy that's used for digestion, but our spleen does more than just digestion. Our spleen circulates energy and chi throughout our body. Our spleen is our ability to feel happy, to feel energized, right? It's like it uplifts thing. If you think about a pregnancy, that's the uplifting energy. If someone has a prolapse of an organ, that's usually your spleen is weak and it's allowing all your energy to fall, right? So eating whole cooked warm foods, there are certain foods for certain energy of the organs and different things, but two major things that everyone can do is eat a lot of saturated fats. Saturated fats support the building of yin in our body. A lot of times when we talk about yin, it's thought of this esoteric thing, but yin is actually a tangible substance in our body. And yin is that thick fluid in our body that is used to create hormones, to create synovial fluid, joint fluid, collagen, all of that. So in order to build thick fluid, we need to eat thick fluid. And saturated fat is the epitome of thick fluid, right? If you think about butter, bone broth that's like has a lot of collagen in it, fatty red meat, those are all really wonderful sources of saturated fat. And of course, whenever I mention saturated fat, somebody will think, well, I have heart disease in my family, I can't eat saturated fat. That is just bullshit that was fed to us. I don't know when, maybe starting in the 1950s. There's many books on it. There's many resources on it. And honestly, even modern day cardiologists will tell you it's bullshit. It's not cholesterol that causes heart disease. It's the stagnation of cholesterol, right? Like, why would our bodies create something that's going to kill us? Yeah. Our bodies create cholesterol. Our bodies need cholesterol to support our mind, which, going back to women's health, this is why women are more susceptible to things like heart disease and Alzheimer's because they lose estrogen as they age, right? Estrogen is yin. Estrogen is a yin hormone. So if we don't support that yin with more saturated fat, then it puts us at risk for things like heart disease, surprisingly, and Alzheimer's. So saturated fat's not our enemy. It's things like sugar and processed foods that really are the enemy.
All the dyes in the food.
All the dyes, everything that's not, grown in the ground or eats off the ground, essentially.
I just watched the RFK hearing today and yesterday, and it's just so interesting to open your eyes to how the system is just corrupt from both sides. This is not a political statement. It's just corrupt in general. And
yes.
I really hope our country is able to move towards a more functional and humanitarian approach to healing our bodies, which, Chinese medicine does. how does Chinese medicine help remove blockages in the body caused by trauma? Is it that you're putting the needles in the area meridian, the energy meridians in the body that then awaken the energy? And like, how does that work? I'm always so curious when my acupuncturist puts in the needles. I'm like, what is it stimulating? Like, what is it actually doing in the body?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to focus talking about the 8 extraordinary channels, which sit on our constitutional level, or DNA, or genetics, or the deepest level of chi in our body, because those really are where we're going to focus mainly when we're talking about trauma in the body. But the practice of acupuncture, and when I say acupuncture, it can mean putting needles in the body, or it can mean just using the energy of the channel. So when I'm doing remote treatments, I'm just using the energy of the channel, because acupuncture and Chinese medicine started out as shamanic medicine. It started out as channel work, right? Of using the energy the same way you would do in Reiki, where you're not touching the body, or even like a psychic reading when you're not sitting in the room with the person, right? You're using energy. So the intention is really important when you're needling into a channel. And I tend to focus on channels, not points. That is, again, channels is more classical acupuncture, points is more TCM. The points do have usages, right? So you'll pick which points make sense for that person and your intention. But my intention mainly is on the channel. So these channels, specifically the 8 extraordinary channels, have a vibration to them, right? And they all have a different vibration. So it's working with that vibration, and sometimes that vibration is to support the building of resources in the body. And sometimes that vibration is to bring that person back to seeing who they are, seeing themselves as perfect the way they were born and the way they came into this world. And sometimes the vibration of that needle is meant to release this energy of trauma, of this something happened in our life that set us off on a path that we weren't meant to go on, right? To bring us back to our blueprint of where we're meant to be.
That's so beautiful. As you speak, I just have this heartfelt intention that our whole planet can come back to this kind of healing. And it's so interesting. So many people in my life are data driven. They want to see the data, and we have forgotten as a humanity that actually our greatest data we have is how we feel. Our feeling is our greatest data. And what I love about what you're saying is that the energy, the meridians, the channels, like these are things that improve the way that you feel, and they're non-invasive. Gosh, if anyone is listening that is just like on the fence about Chinese medicine, or if you know somebody who is on the fence of Chinese medicine, send this episode to them. There is so much beauty in looking at some of the non-invasive, low risk ways of healing that can be more transformative and powerful than science sometimes may give it credit for. My last question for you is really just actually wanting to get your personal opinion on something. And why do you feel that there are so many women dealing with infertility at a younger age now? And before I have you answer that, from an ancestral perspective, I'm looking at it like, all right, we've got unhealed and unacknowledged physical, emotional, sexual experiences, plus other kinds of traumas that exist that are living in the body, and they're building up over generations, right? They're just compounding and compounding, and they're being repeated. And many people who listen to this podcast are people that are saying, hey, I don't want this to repeat anymore. I want this to stop. And there's so many different ways to do that. Like family constellation therapy isn't the only way. It's my favorite way, but it's not the only way. Just like yeah, I'm so glad you love it. I know. I just, it makes me so happy. But for you with classical Chinese medicine, that's your favorite way to do it. And so you can break generational cycles emotionally, physically, and spiritually by really doing many different things. And Chinese medicine is one of them.
Yeah. So I love this question, because I see more women in my practice recently who are, 28, 29, 30, who are struggling to get pregnant, right? And it's a big thing. And there's a lot of reasons to it, I think. One reason is simply the fact that there's this rhetoric that it's hard to get pregnant. Everywhere you look on social media, it's like, oh, it's hard to get pregnant. It's hard to get pregnant. Like, you're not going to get pregnant if you have this or this or this. And yeah, yes, it can be hard to get pregnant, but it doesn't have to be. But if you're coming at it from this stance of like, it's going to take me a year to get pregnant. It's going to be hard. I might have to do IVF. Like, yes, it is going to be hard for you to get pregnant, right? You can't accomplish something that you don't think you can do, right? You're not going to walk across a thing of fire when you don't think you can. Like, they just.
Can I say something on that real quick? The amount of women I do readings for that want to get pregnant, and I don't see anything wrong with them getting pregnant physically. It is purely the emotional reality that they're
Yeah,
creating for their body is wild to me. And once they start to shift that and they use certain modalities to help shift that, I get emails like a month or two later, oh, I'm pregnant. And it's like,
yeah.
great. Like, yes, your brain and your thoughts, they do have a component to creating your reality.
Yeah, I had a patient the other day, a fertility patient, who her doctor had told her that her stress is making it hard for her to get pregnant. And she mentioned this to me as like, this like gives me anxiety whenever I have stress, that I'm also making it hard for me to get pregnant. I was like, well, then that's a limiting belief, right? Like, yes, do I actually think that stress affects our fertility? Like, yes. But honestly, if you believe it, right, we create our reality. If you choose not to believe something, then that's not your reality. And I know that sounds like ridiculous in some sense, but it's also true. If we create our stress and anxiety for ourselves, then it's there. If we don't, it's not, right?
For some cases, I will say that there are definitely women that I've worked with um who are in very stressful situations and they're not getting pregnant. But there's a majority of women who are also living in the accumulation of their stress and anxiety, and their relationship with themselves and their bodies are almost self-inflicted in some ways,
Right.
where it's like this pattern that's keeping them stuck. And I want to go back and say just for a moment too, I'm not saying that is the case for everyone. I definitely don't want that to come off as like a privileged comment that like it's all in your head, because it's definitely not.
Yeah.
There are women that have real issues, but there are a lot of times where I do readings for women and I don't see anything go, and their doctors are saying there's nothing I mean, you should be getting pregnant. We're not really sure what the cause is. And a few months later, they come back and they're pregnant. So yeah, it is really interesting to look at all of the parts of
Right.
this.
And I'm not saying stress and anxiety doesn't affect your fertility. It
Right.
absolutely does. But to layer that belief on top of it is
Right.
not supporting you, right? But to go back to your original question, I also think, well, there's a lot of reasons. So I'm going to answer, have to at least two more reasons. One, we live in a masculine energy right now, right? Women are told to grow up to live these big careers to get in the workforce, which I 100% agree with. You should follow your purpose, do what feels good to you. And if that's working in a high corporate job, that is great. The problem is that all these jobs have this really big masculine energy where we feel like we need to work from a very yang state. And when I'm talking about yang energy, that's our stress hormones. We feel like we need to be activated in order to do a good job. And that's honestly simply not the case. But when we're working from that yang state, when we're working from that fight or freeze state that activates our stress hormones, what that does is deplete our yin hormones, which are our sex hormones, right? They're all created from the same energy, from the same place. So there's that. And then obviously like the stress and anxiety that comes up on with that as well. But then I also think it goes back to what you said about this stored trauma and generations of it.
Mm.
But then to couple on top of that, we're living lifestyles that deplete our body of resources to hold in that stored trauma, like I mentioned, right?
Mm.
So, your mother or your grandmother probably had lots of stored trauma, but she was eating off a farm, right? She was eating red meat and raw milk and, she was eating whole foods every day to help support her body so that she could almost physically bypass that trauma in a sense to support her reproductive health and to get pregnant. Whereas that's just not an option today, right? It's like it's near impossible unless you grow your own food and cook all your food at home. But most women don't do that, right? We go to work, we eat out, we order takeout. Even trying your hardest is depleting. And then again, layering that on top of working late hours or high intensity exercise, trying to fit into a certain size or look a certain way, all of those things are depleting our energy and our ability to get pregnant.
Hmm. It's always a yes and in my mind, it's
Yeah.
always that conversation I'm having with myself of Yes, I have pre-diet. You know what's interesting actually is well, of course I'm not trying to get pregnant, but I've been told my whole life by Western medicine doctors, you have endometriosis. I've had a laparoscopy for it. I've had 2 hospitalizations for it. I was put on birth control for 10 years nonstop with no period, hence why I'm having a lot of issues today with my gut and all these things. And I've been told you're probably going to have a very hard time getting pregnant. Meanwhile, I have seen well over 10 different mediums in these last 15 years of me being an adult. And they've all said, be careful. There's a baby around you. You can get pregnant really easily. And, it just makes me think like, if I'm always having this yes and conversation, right? And then the time does come that I'm ready to get pregnant, is that baby going to come in quickly? Or am I going to feed into the idea of the Western medicine doctors? And then so what makes me think is, if I didn't have the holistic foundational beliefs I do around fertility, then maybe I would start seeking out all these other things to layer on top of the fear that I'm never going to get pregnant when
Right.
I don't even know. I haven't even tried. So
Right.
it just is so interesting to think about that. Yes, your PCOS is real, or yes, your endometriosis is real. And maybe that doesn't have to be the story that's playing out in your head. And maybe there's things that you can do today, like maybe you realize you have the MTHFR gene and you take methylfolate every day.
Right.
Maybe you start taking a prenatal. Maybe you start checking your iron levels or your hormones, and maybe your partner starts to look into things too. I mean, women take the brunt so much for fertility
Yeah.
issues, but there's another piece of the part here. We can't just do it with 2 eggs. We got a
Yeah.
sperm and an
And
egg that needs.
the statistics are like in terms of miscarriage that the sperm is more significant. So
So I just think, my biggest hope for the community is just to take away from this conversation the yes, and yes, traditional Chinese medicine is helpful for people, and some people need some deeper work. Yes, you are sensitive when it comes to chronic illness and disease, and you can find people who will help you in your journey with it. Yes, you're having fertility issues and you have these pre-diagnosed conditions, and who knows what's possible for
right.
you. And
I
the worst thing you could do is just try something new.
Right. I also just want to comment on that sensitive aspect. If you are a sensitive person, you have a sensitive body, which I am also. It can feel hard because you feel everything around you and your body reacts to it at the same way. Your body can heal really quickly because it is sensitive to that energy.
Perspective. I never even thought about that before. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really special way to think about it, because I think I was always told growing up, you're so sensitive, you're so sensitive, and people say it today. Oh, when I get my IVs, oh, so sensitive, and I'm like, I know, I'm so sensitive, but like I just, I don't, and the beauty is that being so sensitive means that I also it's such a gift in my work is to be so sensitive, and so it's hard to navigate the yes and with that too. So, well, Katherine, this conversation has been wonderful and really supportive. And I know the community is going to love learning about another way that they can heal their intergenerational trauma that they're carrying and manifesting in their bodies today. How can people connect with you, and follow your work, and also drop the podcast again for people as well?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Manhattan Medicine Woman. My website is the same, www.manhattanmedicinewoman.com. So you can, find, and my podcast is There She Goes, so you can see my work and learn about me more there, and you can always reach out via email, which you can find on there as well.
We'll link it in the show notes. And then for people who are not in Manhattan or in New York and want to find somebody who is a classic Chinese medicine practitioner, can they just Google it? Is there a resource website, or should they just reach out to you and you can help them find someone?
Yeah, I would recommend reaching out to me is probably the best way to find someone.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, like I mentioned, there are some resources. You can go on Anne Cecil Sturman's website, or the Taoist School of Acupuncture in North Carolina also has the website resources. But again, it's like what someone study versus what does they practice could be different. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, guys, you heard it here first. And thank you so much, Katherine, for your time, your knowledge, and your expertise. And I can't wait for everyone to listen.
thank you for having me.
Yeah.